Now, here's a fun fact. Wednesday is bin day in Łódź, Poland. How do I know this? Because I was woken up at 5 o'clock this morning with a loud, noisy dumpster being wheeled along the alley below my hotel room window. Welcome to Travelcaster, the travel pod that takes you there. Our Polish adventure so far has taken us to the attractive city of Wrocław and the surprisingly industrial city of Łódź. But today we are off to the capital, Warsaw. It's 131 kilometers from where we are this morning, and it's going to take about an hour and a half on the train. So join us on the journey. Well, we encountered something quite unusual last night for the first time on this journey. Rain in quite a lot of abundance, actually. There were thunderstorms knocking about this area, and it has certainly given this morning a much cooler and fresher feel, which is ideal for travelling because although it's only been about 25 degrees, not boiling hot, that is quite warm when you're walking around on foot and exploring quite a bit. So here we are in the morning in Łódź. We're waiting for the number 12 tram that's going to take us back to the Łódź-Fabrycna railway station, where we're going to connect to the train to go to Warsaw. Now, I've travelled on railways all across Europe, and I can never remember arriving at a station at 8:30 in the morning where it's so quiet. I almost feel like I shouldn't be speaking at all. This is Łódź-Fabrycna station, a huge glass complex with connections going all over the country, including today's train to Warsaw, but there's hardly anybody here. And those that are here aren't saying a word. None of the usual hustle and bustle you associate with a train station. It's a bit weird.
Stacja Koluszki.
Now, not only was the station quiet, the train is as well. It's only going to be about an hour and a half to take us from Łódź to Warsaw, and today I've opted for second class. The reason for that is, well, I'd like to have a seat to myself rather than having to share a compartment with 6 strangers. So I've got a seat in an open carriage, there's loads of leg room, and it's extremely comfortable. What's more, the fare for a 130 kilometre journey has cost me just €8. That's great value. And less than an hour and a half later, it is Good Morning Warsaw as we exit the central station. Now, bear in mind the platforms are one level down, so you'll need to go up an escalator or a walkway to get to the main hall. And as you exit, look generally to your left, if you will, and just behind the station you will see one of the big monuments of Warsaw, the Palace of Culture and Science, more of which a little bit later. But now it's time to find my hotel, and it should be fairly easy because I can see it from the steps of the station. It is the Novotel, one of the big ones. It's in the distance about 500 metres. There's a police van just pulling out in front of the traffic, and it should be just a short walk over to the hotel itself. The only thing is, it's 10:45 in the morning, so I'm not quite sure whether they're going to allow me some early check-in or not. If not, I'll just leave my bags there and start to explore. Well, that was rather good. Barely after 11 o'clock in the morning, and the very helpful receptionist said, "Your room is ready. Would you like something on a higher floor?" So I said, yes. So we have ascended to floor number 27. It's great because this hotel's actually got 2 sets of elevators, one for the lower floors and one for the upper floors, so you don't have to hang about as long. So let's just go along the corridor. Room 2720. And here we are in a lovely, lovely room. And huge bed, nice cozy easy chair in the corner, coffee machine, and over here a window that opens out over the city, and in the distance, about a mile away, I can see Poland's national football stadium rising majestically above the skyline. That is a magnificent view. Now, it's worth saying that in a capital city, you are going to be paying a bit more for your accommodations. And there's no shortage of options here in Warsaw. I have gone for a big chain hotel. I might have considered an apartment, but actually they were all about the same price. And 3 nights stay here has come in at nearly €400, including breakfast, which is quite steep. But considering it's July, and considering it is a European capital city, I think that still comes under the good value banner. So, time to explore Warsaw's history, and it is absolutely everywhere. I've just walked out the hotel and got a number 128 bus up what is known as the Royal Route, because it leads to the Royal Palace, more of which later. But partway along the route, along the road known as the New World, you come here to perhaps the first stunning building on your itinerary, the Carmelite Church, built in the 1660s, but it's got a great story behind it. First of all, it was the home to Frédéric Chopin's first organ recital. The famous composer was born here in Warsaw. And even more impressive than that, this church was one of only 2 in the city that survived the Second World War. The best views are always the unexpected ones, aren't they? And just off the Royal Route, just before you get to the Royal Palace, look to the right and you'll see a large building which is essentially the National Agriculture Library. Okay, that's not going to be of much interest if you don't want to look up tractors and stuff. But just beyond that is St Anne's Church. And at the back of St Anne's Church is this rather tranquil garden. I say tranquil because it overlooks a massive road that cuts between the Royal Way and the palace itself, but it is tranquil. It's overgrown with all kinds of wild plants. There are bird tables everywhere, pigeons fighting off the smaller birds, and some cracking views of the side of the Royal Palace itself. It's completely free. Just turn right off the Royal Way. It's well worth 15 minutes of your time. Now, I'm going to just delay my visits to the Royal Palace for a few moments because it's full of school children. So with the palace on your right, take a left along Świętojanska Street, and you'll pass a couple of rather neat looking churches before you come to the Rynek, the market square in the historic old town of Warsaw. And as you'd expect, the Rynek is not being used for market stalls. It's being used for a good dozen restaurants doing a fine trade on this July lunchtime. The problem is they all look the same. They've all got those sort of tacky menus outside with pictures of their dishes that probably look nothing like the thing that appears on your plate when it arrives. And I fancy the prices aren't going to be cheap here either. Now, the thing that you have to remember about Warsaw's old town is, in fact, most of it's quite new. The music playing here in the Cathedral of St John looks like it's in a historical 15th century setting. But in fact, this cathedral like many of the buildings around here, had to be reconstructed in their entirety after the Second World War. It's fascinating to think that most of the historic sites that you're looking at are, on the whole, reconstructions of what were here before. They did a blooming good job of it, though. So here's the dilemma. If you're in the Old Town and you don't want to pay the Old Town prices or eat the same Old Town food, where do you go? Well, step just a few yards away from the Rynek, and here on Nowa Miejska you'll find the Muźnik restaurant. It is a tiny place full of family cooking, particularly the Polish pierogi. If you've not tasted these, they're potato dumplings filled with all sorts of tasty things. I had the meat ones. You can have a cheese and spinach one. It's a bit like pasta, but it's made of potatoes instead. And it won't cost you the earth either. A main course here came in at €10, which for the middle of the Old Town, for the middle of July, is pretty good value. You're listening to Travelcaster, the travel pod that takes you there today, coming to you from the Polish capital of Warsaw. To find out how to get here, and for ideas of what to do when you arrive, head to travelcaster.blog, and don't forget to subscribe to the pod. So it's day 2 of our visit to Warsaw in Poland, and I'm not saying that the breakfast room in the hotel was big, but I had to adjust my watch to a different time zone between getting the food from the buffet and sitting down. Enormous. Just like everything else in Warsaw, actually, when you first walk out onto the city streets, you may be a little bit overwhelmed by the scale of everything, because as well as all the enormous amounts of traffic, there are these great glass buildings and towers that rise up above you. And then the classical Polish design of buildings that you associate with Eastern Europe as well. And they're all around. They really do kind of overwhelm the senses. And then when you take into account that traffic I was mentioning, having to cross busy streets, having to navigate the different transport systems, it can be a little bit much. So my advice is to spend a couple of hours after breakfast just chilling in the hotel or wherever you're staying and planning out your day accordingly. That's what I've done, and today I've decided it's going to be all about history. So we've taken a bus to the west of the Old Town, and from the street opposite the Krasinski Palace you will see one of Warsaw's most important bits of history commemorated. It's on the main road. It's hard to miss because it depicts the Warsaw Uprising of 1944. Around 15,000 resistance fighters and 250,000 civilians were killed during a 63-day resistance against the German army. It started off as an act of defiance, but ended in tragedy. Roughly 90% of Warsaw was subsequently destroyed by German forces in retaliation. Survivors were deported and the city was systematically razed, and the Soviet Red Army, stationed nearby, didn't intervene. And today, across the road from one of the many churches and cathedrals, is this monument made of bronze, which depicts people coming up from the ruins of the streets, some of them carrying guns, some of them carrying more simple weapons, and all of them operating in an act of defiance against the Nazis. There is an official museum to the Warsaw Uprising on the other side of the city, but do expect long lines in the summer as people queue up to get inside. Much better, I think, to come over here and see this far more poignant sight. In fact, it's entirely appropriate that the bells we heard from the church were from here, which is basically the military cathedral of the Polish Field Army, just across the road from the monument. And it's symbolised by sculptures of an aircraft propeller and an anchor on either side of its huge door. If we go inside, and you can just come in and see the magnificent architecture of this place. Originally built in the 1600s in a Baroque style, it was unsurprisingly flattened in the Second World War and completely reconstructed. And there are plaques on the walls paying homage to various military figures over the centuries. I've taken a tram across the Vistula River to here, the Praga districts of the city, and taken the tram, the noisy one, to Zabkorska. It's 2 stops over the bridge, or 3 stops over the bridge from the main old town. It's a bit more rough and ready than the touristy part, but that's entirely a good thing. And I can already see somewhere that I want to check out. Because behind this unassuming entrance is the Bazaar Roskiego, which roughly translates to farmers' markets. It's one of the oldest marketplaces in Warsaw, and it's less of a farmers' market today, more for selling clothes and that kind of thing, and household goods. But in 2025, disaster struck, because as you walk through the market, you'll see that most of the stores are quite old-fashioned. They're made of wood with tin roofs. And in March 2025, there was a major fire here which destroyed many of the stalls. And as you walk around, you start to smell the charred remains, and you walk around the corner, and there they are, the burnt out stalls still in place. It's a little bit weird, but it does give you a taste, really, of modern Warsaw in its raw reality, I guess. Well, just a few steps from the farmers market, you can step back in time to this, the Museum of Praga. It's a free exhibit, and it tells the history of this district, which was founded in the late 15th century as a settlement on the west bank of the Vistula River. Now, over the centuries, it's suffered its fair share of woes. There was an invasion by the Swedish army. And then during the Second World War, despite most of the main part of Warsaw being completely destroyed, Praga largely survived, although it didn't go unscathed. In fact, there's a really poignant picture of the entrance to that farmer's market, which was heavily damaged during the war. Now, the Praga Museum wasn't just about photographs, because on the next floor up was an exhibition of all kinds of stuff that's been made here over the centuries, everything from cash registers to children's games. And the photographic exhibits really came to life as well, because there were descriptions of what people did in this area during their spare time. Some wonderful black and white photographs from the 40s right through to the 80s of people enjoying the zoo, resting on the banks of the Vistula River, and just generally having a good time. The best thing about this museum, it's completely free, and I would recommend, whilst you're here, have a coffee and cake at Monkey Business Cafe, which is part of it. Absolutely delicious. Now, a quick Travelcaster tip on using public transport in Warsaw. We were talking earlier about downloading the app that you can top up at any time in almost any Polish city and use on board the transport. But make sure, whatever you do, whether you're using an app or a paper ticket, that you validate your ticket when you first use it. That often means scanning a QR code on board the tram or bus on your very first journey. If you don't validate your ticket, and the inspector comes around to check it, you will be thrown off and you could face a fine. Nowogrodzka may not be the most famous street in Warsaw, nor the most attractive, unless that is you enjoy craft beer and a bit of life at about 5 p.m. As we found during this trip, the artisan drinks market is booming in Poland, and on Nowogrodzka, just behind the Novotel, you'll find no fewer than 8 decent bars. And in a crowded field, of course, they need to come up with original names. My favourite so far, Jabberwocky. Jabberwocky. You get the idea, yeah? It's our third and final day in Warsaw, and it's time to get away from the traffic. And I think I know just the spot. Because a 15-minute bus ride and a further 10-minute walk brings you here to Warsaw Park, an extensive area of green which is described as an eternal oasis in the middle of the ever-changing capital. And it has a couple of stunning sights. You see, this place was part of a great complex of heritage gardens, my guide tells me, home to a royal menagerie in the 17th century. And it has a palace on the lake. It's really easy to get to. When you get off the bus, it seems like you're in the middle of a motorway, but you just go up the steps, walk past the botanic gardens, which you can pay a small fee to go and see if gardens and plants are your thing, but you can come here to Warsaw Park and see plenty of greenery for absolutely nothing, and it's absolutely stunning. There's plenty to see here and plenty of visitors around on this warm July day. This park is full of brilliant buildings. There's an orangery, a water tower, and then you come down here to the main attraction, the Isle on the Lake. It's an elegant palatial structure which is home to many selfies usually, although at the moment, time of recording, there's loads of scaffolding on the front and the back, so getting a decent shot of the building is a bit challenging. Nevertheless, it's a beautiful sight. You can pay an entrance fee to go into the palace itself and the orangery and some of the other buildings. Plenty of exhibitions if that's your thing, but on a sunny day like today, with the bells of various churches ringing out and the quiet hum of summer traffic, i.e. tourists, it's just as nice staying outside, to be honest. Time for a coffee and cake. Now, I have just experienced a first here on Nowy Swiat, the street that goes up to the Royal Palace. Enjoying a coffee and a cake, as I was. A lady came along, sat down next to me, and just took the coffee off me and said a few words in Polish, which I didn't understand, started drinking it, and then threw the cup into the candle holder. Fortunately, I'd nearly finished the coffee when this happened, but it has never happened to me before. I have seen lots of different strange activities on my travels. People begging for money, people just coming up to you asking for stuff. I've never had somebody sit down to me and nick my coffee though. Before leaving Warsaw, it's time to visit one of the first sites that I saw when I got here, because as you come out of the central station, you cannot miss the Palace of Culture and Science. It's one of the city's most iconic landmarks and tallest building, standing at 237 metres. Now, it looks like something out of 1930s New York. Completed in 1955, it was a, quote, gift from the Soviet Union in the Stalinist style with influences from Polish Renaissance architecture. And it divides opinion. Today in Warsaw, some people think it's a monument to the past and should be ripped down. Others say no, it is one of the things that draws visitors in, and it certainly does. And there's plenty to see inside in terms of, well, a big view, which I'll take you to next. Well, even though I'd bought my ticket in advance, it was a bit of a wait, about 20 minutes to get through the queue here. But then we ascended rapidly 5 minutes up to the 31st floor of the palace, and here we can see stunning views all across Warsaw. On every side of the palace you can climb up, have a look out, take a selfie, that kind of thing. Mind you, there's about 100 people or more on this level right now. It's a really busy afternoon, so waiting for the right spot is a matter of patience. Nevertheless, you will be rewarded with these great views, and at certain times of the year as well, you can come up in the evening. Just check the website for details. You pay a bit extra, but you might get an extra special selfie to go with. So we've come to the end of our Polish adventure. 3 cities in 1 week. Can you do it in high season and still get good value? Well, the answer is undoubtedly yes. From the less touristy areas like Wrocław and Łódź to here in the capital Warsaw with its bustling old town, you can find bargains even during the high season, even though you may be surrounded by literally millions of other people trying to do the same thing. What I found is a confident country and a friendly one as well. It's really easy to get around using the trains or the buses. Navigation is quite simple, and there's always something along those back streets just to explore and see something a bit different. Well, that's going to be about it for this edition of the podcast and indeed this season. For more ideas of where to go and what to do when you get here, check out travelcaster.blog. Subscribe to the pod and join us again soon for more Travelcaster, the travel pod that takes you there.